And now we have all of our trim created for all of our rooms except our closets and our garage, which doesn't need trim. And we could take a look at the trim with our walls and along with our windows and doors. And we can see that it's all really starting to come together. So now all we need to do is take this trim, move it down to the bottom, we can mirror it, and then we need to cut out all of our doors. So I'm going to go back to our trim layer, and I just want to assign this as trim walls. And just using the Q key for that to open up our surface assigner. And now I'm going to put our walls in the background, or actually we could even use that floor and ceiling just to make it a little easier. And I'm going to go into our Snap Multiply Mirror tool. And I'm just going to create that about right there. And then I'm going to select all of our bottom trim. I might need to zoom out for that. Hold down Shift to re-add to our selection. And now we can see that we're going to need to bring this down. And the majority of this is going to be going into the floor. But it's going to look alright because of the way this is set up. If you need to, you can just go ahead along the bottom and actually create a custom trim for that bottom if there's something else you maybe wanted to have different about it. And if you did do it customly too, then you wouldn't have to go along and cut out all of your door regions because you just wouldn't include those lines because the profiler works with open line curves as well. So if I wanted to, I could just have our wall layer set in the background, and we could go ahead and just create lines on the points along the bottom. And then we wouldn't have to worry at all about cutting out our doors. But I'm just going to use the existing trim, and we'll go along and cut out the areas. So I'm going to select our bottom trim, cut it from that current layer, paste it into a new layer, just to get it out of there. Go into our top view, and now what we can do is just go in here, and we want to set maybe our walls to the background, just whatever's going to show us the easiest way, even maybe our doors. So let's take a look back in the 4-point view, and we can see all of our doors. And now some of these aren't matching up perfectly because of the way that everything is set up and the way our doors were customly created, because there's no trim on the outsides of our doors, at least not where it would match up with the existing trim. One thing we could do is if we created a door that was just the door itself, and then we could use the line tool the same way we selected our trim, but actually go along the entire outline of a room. So we would select the corners along with the bottom of the door, the top, and move all the way around. And that way we could specify trim that's all going to be connected if we wanted to have it like that. And that's just another way we could do it. But let's just use what we have right now with our doors in the background. We're going to select our drill rectangle, and we could just start cutting the trim out along all of our different doors. and we just want to match those up. And it's really quite easy since we have the ability to just snap to those door objects that are in the background. And we could just go throughout the entire model and quickly and easily remove all of the trim that isn't needed. And I might need to cut that one and be a little more specific about it. But overall, you basically get the idea. It's fairly simple. If we take a look in that room now, load up our doors, and everything else, we can see that room looks pretty good. We've got all of our trim set up on the top and the bottom. And like I said, these really don't connect where our doors are at, so we might need to specify and be a little more specific about when we're creating our trim for those doors. But it really depends on the presets that you have and whether or not you've designed your own doors to use ahead of time, which is usually a good idea, just to go ahead and set those up before you really create them, like I was saying before. And that's the main reason so you don't run into these problems. And if you take a look down here, you can see that that last drill that we created did not fully cut in. So we can easily just grab those points for the trim, maybe use the move snap, and just snap that to the end of our trim for our current door. So I'm just going to go around and cut out the remainder of these objects for our trim just to finish that up. And then we'll take a look at our doors that are just completely open, and we'll just add just some trim to those as well. And now we have all of our trim created for the bottom and all of our doors cut out. So let's take a look at everything. I'm going to keep the ceiling layer and floor off. But we can just go around and take a look at the rooms and see that everything looks really nice. And we've got a really decent looking apartment going on. Now, if we want to take a look at these openings that we have and add the same trim to those as well, what I want to do is just go into our wall layer and maybe just set that to the background where we have a new layer where we create these lines. And we'll go to the LWCAD tab, select primitive line, and just go in here and select the outer edges. And now we have a new line in here that's open. And what I want to do is just go to the extended, and we're going to select our profiler, pull that out, open up a numeric, set that to match, so we're going to have 2.6 inches like we did before, and then we need to specify exactly where this is going to go. And it looks like if we set it to 2, that should be fine. If we take a look though, on the other side, it looks like most of our detail is facing the other direction. So one thing I want to do is just flip this horizontally, and now we can see that trim is correct. And with our pivot set to number 2, it fits out right. And it's not always going to be the same pivot for everything you're working on. Most of the trim I was working on before, I had to switch between 1 and 4. And now that I'm working a little bit differently, we can see that 2 will allow us to position that correctly. But let's just take a look now with our trims. And you can see it doesn't really match up on our bottom. And the main reason for that is because this is facing a different direction. We have this thicker part on the bottom of our trim. So one thing we might need to do in this case is just to remove those outer trim areas from this point right here where we have the connection and just outward. And that'll make it a lot easier. We could also join those together but it would be really quite difficult to do that since they are facing the other directions, and mainly because they really are going to have different points in different places, and doing that would be somewhat difficult. But if I was to initially create the entire trim in this room by creating one polyline, in this case, what I would do is select from over here, and then this point, the next point down, and then over to here, and then select these points up here, move along, and then of course if I needed to go along some of the other areas, I would select those as well. But if we did it in that method where we had one polyline moving across the entire room, then everything would be positioned correctly. And like I said, if we were working on doors where you want to have all that trim matched up and be the same, then you want to make sure you start out with a door that doesn't have any trim and then won't affect the outside layer. And we could still do that. We could add extra trim to that to even everything out. But overall, this is a pretty good representation of what you can do. And if I wanted for this one, I could easily just mirror this over to our other side, and if it doesn't match up, just use Move Snap to snap it into place. And like I said, I'm also going to want to cut out that bottom trim to get that to match up. And I'm just going to go ahead and finish that up and just show you what it looks like completely finished. But before I do that, I'm going to do a couple of other things. And it mostly involves the vector clone tool. Now in this case we have an apartment and we have a garage. Now if I was going to create multiple levels for this to create a building, I wouldn't really be able to use this garage layer. And that's because we wouldn't have the garages off the ground. But we can still go ahead and use this for that, just to show a good representation. And what we could always do as well is even just cut off and create another layer specifically for the upper levels of this apartment, or even a room where we didn't have the garage door available, which might be another reason to not cut out this area for the garage until after you've created the upper levels. But I'm just going to start out with our walls, and then we also want our floor and ceiling. And I'm not going to use the windows and doors just to keep it simple, but we could easily take all of those windows and doors. Actually, I might as well just go ahead and grab them. So we'll select those. Windows and doors. I'm going to leave that garage door out, and it'll look a little bit better with those windows and doors. So I'm just going to copy all of this and put it into a new layer. And I'm going to switch to our 4 views. And at this point too, we could probably remove that image in the background. And since we have it actually set to a plane on the ground, we could always access that material, even though it could be a little more difficult to see once we're in the other viewports, because we'd have to switch to texture mode. But we could also do texture wireframe, and that would show up as well. But let's move on and go to our vector clone. We're going to select from one area up to the top. And actually, I'm just going to undo that and redo that again, because I selected the wrong point, and sometimes it's just easier to redo it. But now you can see we have 2 layers, and I disabled the tool, so we currently cannot bring it up any higher. So I'll go back and just undo that. Select our vector clone again, which is quite easy because all we need to do is just select those 2 points, and now we can just change the count. Bring it up to 8, and now we have 8 levels. Now of course we have these doors on the outside, so it doesn't look quite right, and it's not going to work of course for every single floor plan, so you might need to create modified levels. But in this case what I could actually do is, since we do have a patio for this specific plan, I could just create a box to represent our patio on each layer, and that way we could have that overall patio going all the way up, and then maybe add some railings to it, we can use the line tool to create a curve, and then use the profiler with that to create some nice railing segments for the in-between posts and pegs along with the top railing itself, and just have maybe floors going all the way up. We can see that it's quite easy to create large buildings in this way. And if we zoom in and get actually inside, you can see that all of our surfaces and everything we created is in there, except the fact that our trim was not copied along with this layer. So I can just go ahead and delete this, since we're not really going to need it. And I'm just going to go ahead and finish up the rest of that trim, and then we can take a look at basically the finished product. All of our trim is now finished up, and if we just take a look at these trim objects separately, we can see they match up quite well on the bottoms. And of course we do have that little bit of trim that actually goes into the ground, which is why we have that little bit of a separation. But overall, it looks really good. So let's take a look at all of our different layers together. And without our floor and ceiling, and we can see that we have a really nice looking apartment that we can go ahead and bring into layout and start animating, start texturing and lighting it, and doing some renders. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and that you learned a lot about LWCAD, because it is a fantastic program, and like I said, once you get a hang of it, you'll be able to do everything extremely quickly, and definitely in a lot less time than you would normally have to take in order to create something like this with native Lightwave features. So it's a fantastic tool. Hope you learned a lot. And in future tutorials, we'll be covering a little more things in depth into creating more specific objects and more specific type houses with multiple levels and a lot of different options.